Hey, thanks so much for that, Anthony. Joining me right now, Ashley Willcott, judge and trial attorney out of Atlanta. Ashley, good morning to you.
Good morning, Vincent. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. So listen, we've been covering this Kristopher Love in Texas. I mean, this is the stuff that's made in movies. You have this jealous lover who hires a hitman, who hires a getaway driver. They follow her around for weeks. The hitman says, oh, it was just supposed to be a robbery. I was just going to take her ID so she couldn't catch the flight. But he's on trial for capital murder right now in the state of Texas. Kristopher Love, as you can see him there on your screen, the defendant in this case. Ashley, what do you take of this? Because, again, this is more of something you would see in a movie.
Oh, it absolutely is. And so I think there are a couple of different pieces to the puzzle that we'll see in testimony. One is Cortez is the driver of the car. She pled to murder in 35 years. And so you have her as a witness against this defendant. So you put these pieces together, and I think it's a pretty good case for the prosecution.
Yeah, and not only that, I think there was some discussion. You can see part of the jailhouse or the police interrogation there of the suspect. With that Dallas detective there. I think part of the discussion was that this hitman, Kristopher Love, was going to be paid with both drugs and money. So do you think that will have any effect on the jury to say maybe he was under the influence of some type of drug?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that they are going to consider that, but I also think they're going to look at the interrogation video to see how is he acting. Did he appear to be, look to be under the influence? How is he acting at court? How do the people describe him? So I think in and of itself, it's not enough, but if there's some other indicators, it could be enough for the jury to conclude that.
Right, and there's another interesting point, and you just saw the picture there of the victim and her current, or what was her current boyfriend. I guess when he had broken up with Delgado, they still had the same cell plan, and that's how she was able to track not only him, but also the victim here, Kendra Hatcher. They were able to go on the Find My Friends app, which I use for my son all the time because he's still a minor living under my custody. But that's how they were able to track him. So I think this will prove the intent, this will prove the premeditation, and it will prove the motive. We're actually going to switch gears, hear some of the prosecution's closing arguments in this case. Take a listen. All right, that's some closing arguments there from the prosecution in the State versus Kristopher Love. Still with me, Ashley Willcott. Ashley, I want to talk about, we mentioned it here just prior to that clip, this whole premise that she had looked him up basically on the cell phone, this Delgado. And then that's how she found her victim. But then more importantly, she starts following her around for several weeks. Delgado and I believe the getaway driver as well, Cortez. And even Love had followed her around for several weeks. So I know there's a murder piece to this as well, but wouldn't there at some point be a stalking or aggravated stalking piece to this as well?
Well, that's a really good question on why they weren't charged with that, Vincent. It absolutely, as you already pointed out, does show the premeditation because they did all of these steps in order to plan this murder. And they even had testimony that the defendant was wiping off bullets and wiping off the gun so there wouldn't be fingerprints. So why they didn't, that's a lesser included offense. Maybe that's why the prosecution chose not to charge him with that. I don't know. But I do think that arguably is that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would argue that it was stalking, or at least aggravated stalking. Unfortunately, I don't think that Ms. Hatcher knew that this was going on. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, and maybe it was the billing cycle or whatever, that her boyfriend at the time did not get off the plan with Delgado in this case. I mean, that's something that I would do right away. If we're no longer dating, you're not on my cell phone plan because I don't want you to know who I'm communicating with, and vice versa. So we want to listen to the 911 call here of Hassim Saad. He placed a 911 call. Let's take a listen. All right, you heard it. He just said, what else could it be, Ashley? He heard 2 pops. Now, to be clear, to let our viewers know, she was actually shot once in the back of the head, so I assume one of those shots missed. But this 911 caller has no reason to say it was 2 pops versus 1 pop. But how critical do you think this 911 call is? Because he gave this vehicle description of this black Jeep Cherokee. He was right there when those shots rang out.
Oh, this is huge testimony, Vincent, because this is the very first step to identifying the victim, explaining what he heard, identifying the car, and that's how the entire investigation starts. And so it's building the case to say, here were the first steps, and it connects. By the end of the trial, I suspect it will connect the car, the scene, the victim to the defendant who's on trial. So it's really important testimony. Like you said, somebody who calls 911 generally has no incentive to lie.
Right, absolutely, no incentive to lie. I just wonder how this would have gone had he not been there when those shots ring out. I don't know if there's surveillance cameras inside that garage. It looks like a pretty upscale apartment, so I would assume there's surveillance cameras in there. But a lot of times, even with these surveillance cameras, you can see the defendant there with the glasses and the long dreads. A lot of times with these surveillance cameras in these garages, I have one in my garage, it's not always crystal clear, so it's not always easy to point out what type of vehicle it is. But to have that eyewitness there to say it was a black Jeep Cherokee, I think that's crucial. I think that's way better than any surveillance footage. What say you, Ashley?
Oh, I completely agree with you, because you're right. Surveillance footage, not only can it always be difficult to see exactly what's happening, defense argues in a lot of cases that Law&Crime has covered, hey, who knows what happened before the video started or after the video finished, and it's taken out of context, whereas a person can tell you everything that they saw and heard. So it's really important, good testimony in terms of the prosecution's case.
Absolutely. You just saw a screenshot there of some vehicles in that garage with an arrow pointing to one of those vehicles. Actually, let me ask this. I mean, they followed Ms. Hatcher around for weeks. At some point, wouldn't you think someone would say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this? Maybe this is not right. Why did this guy go through this after weeks? He had plenty of time to get out of this. If this was about drugs and money, he could have got drugs and money some other way. Why did he go through with this?
Well, you know, I think you already said it is like a movie. Love, drugs, money, the three things that, you know, have all the appeal to a made-up movie, I think appealed to them in this case. And sure, maybe he could have gotten money from some other ways, but maybe not as much money. But I think once they were in it, sometimes you see criminals with groupthink, where they start planning and hatching and they just get carried away and keep going, and none of them are going to be able to be rational. They thought of it in the first place to say, hey, this is a crime, let's not do it. That's not usually what we see. Instead, it rolls on.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, we're going to take a quick break. We have so much more to come in the Kristopher Love trial. Stay tuned to the Law&Crime Network. Okay, we were just watching surveillance footage from inside the garage where Ms. Hatcher was shot and killed. Again, she was a prominent dentist in Dallas. And that arrow for the viewers was actually the defendant in this case, Kristopher Love. And you could see the black vehicle, which we later learned was a black Cherokee, backing out of a parking spot to go pick him up. Ashley, how crucial is this surveillance footage? Because, again, it was kind of grainy. I mean, I know my cars. I could tell clearly that was a 96 model Jeep Cherokee, but a lot of people looking at that may not know that it's a Jeep Cherokee. But does it corroborate what the caller said, that it was a black Cherokee, at least a black SUV, that actually pulled out of the parking lot really fast when the shooting happened?
It does. And I think what you just said is the most important piece. It's not just this video. It's not just the 911 caller. You put the two together, and this supports what the 911 caller said. And you, like you said, prosecution's done a good job with arrows and captions. Otherwise, if I watch this, Vincent, I'd be like, what the heck is going on? But you see him walking to the car. Remember, Cortez already pled that she was the one that was on this in the car driving. So the car backs out, he gets in, it leaves. So the two together, I think, are pretty compelling.
Yeah, I think it's pretty compelling, but I think it's kind of silly, too, because, yeah, we'll get to that later. Let's actually look at some body cam footage from one of the officers on the scene of the shooting. Take a look. As you can see the couple there on your screen. Ashley, what do you think the effects of the then boyfriend is now? I mean, he started dating her, and he, I guess, maybe in some sense thinks he's the cause of this?
How can you live with it, right? I just can't imagine what he must be going through, and I don't think he'll ever be able to obviously kind of get over it, because he may feel that way. And it's also, you know, what do you feel? I don't know. Maybe you're a man, you could answer this better. Is he going to feel like, oh my God, what did I ever see in her that I was dating her that she would then plan this? How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, and maybe that's why they broke up. Maybe he saw these signs like, hey, this is not someone I should be with. But, you know, at the same time, like, how do you even end up with someone that has that in their psyche to be able to pull something off like that? Maybe, you know, she fooled him, you know, pretty good. We're going to hear a statement from the victim's mother in this case. Take a listen. Okay, you just heard from Kendra's boyfriend in this case. Again, she was a young, prominent dentist in Texas. Ashley, we just heard from the boyfriend. We just heard from the mother, and you saw how emotional the mother was. Now, keep in mind, this crime happened several years back, but here she is on the stand in tears, and I can only imagine, you know, my kids are adults at this point, but I can only imagine the loss of a child, and you can see that emotion there on her face on your screen. Ashley, how powerful was that to this jury? Because this was in 2015.
Right. So it happened in 2015. 3 years later, the mother still has these emotions. I think it is a huge impact, because all of us as parents, Vincent, raise our children and think once we get them through the age of majority and they're out and they're working and they're successful. She was a dentist, right, beautiful, dating someone, all the things you hope for your children. You don't expect to lose them at that point in time in your life. And so to see the distraught mother on the stand and the emotional boyfriend on the stand really affects the jury. I have to say, one thing I wonder in this case is whether or not the jury is biased at all because of all the emotions, seeing the mother so emotional, the boyfriend emotional. You may recall there are two pictures of her that are actually sitting out. Does that bias the jury, or does it convince the jury? I don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly compelling.
Yeah, it's definitely compelling, and you keep seeing her beautiful face on our screen here. I mean, she is a very beautiful young woman, prominent, successful, and you saw the mother there on the screen just breaking down. You saw the boyfriend at the time, and man, I just can't see how he will be able to get over this, because at the end of the day, because he was dating her, she is now dead. So I don't even know how you go on from that. Do you think he may need, and maybe he has and we don't know, do you think he may need some type of counseling or something like that?
Oh, gosh, absolutely. I would think so. Whatever type of help I think that speaks to him, whether it's church, whether it's synagogue, whether it's counseling, whatever it is, you're going to need something. Now, the other piece that we talk a lot about, and I see as a judge, is although having a trial and if and a conviction's obtained doesn't fix it, doesn't change the fact the victim is dead, it would provide some closure either way to the boyfriend, to the mother. And so that's another important piece of our justice system that sometimes I think people overlook.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of that does get overlooked here. I wonder, you know, how Delgado is really feeling right now. I mean, she planned this. She was the mastermind. There's no doubt about it. She was the mastermind. So I wonder how she's feeling right now to be able to look at that, look at Hatcher's mother on the stand and crying. Do you even think that she even has any type of remorse for what she did?
You just used the word I was going to use, remorse. You'd like to hope as a person she does, but quite frankly, and I too often see individuals who are convicted of crimes like, you know, masterminding all of this, or are charged with such a crime, aren't remorseful, don't feel remorse. And that's often the psyche they have in order to be a criminal in the first place.
Yeah, you said it right, the psyche that they have in order to be a criminal, because, again, we talked about it earlier just before the break. They had several weeks that they were following her around, planning, learning her route, learning what time she goes to the garage. That's where she was shot, in the garage. They had been stalking her for weeks so they could plan the actual time to do it. Let's take a listen more from the boyfriend in this case. All right, Ashley. So we just heard some pretty key stuff here that Ricardo had actually told Brenda Delgado, the mastermind behind this, that he was seeing someone, and it didn't appear like she had a problem with it. But again, we talked about, the Find My Friends app on the cell phone, but apparently she still had access to his emails, his text messages, and that's how she knew about these trips that they were planning in Mexico and other places. I mean, yeah, I don't really know what to think about this because, when you break up with someone, that's exactly what it is. It's a breakup. And you do away with those things like the access to the Facebooks and the emails and the text messages. Why do you think he didn't do this? Maybe because he didn't get a sense that she had a problem with it? Do you think that's what it was?
Maybe, but let's play devil's advocate, Vincent. Everybody has had a breakup, a heartbreak at some point in their lives, right, as an adult. And so I think that we trust that whoever we either break up with or has broken up with us is not going to stalk us, look at all our information, and plan and execute someone who we're now involved with. I mean, human nature is to believe the good in people, not to think she's going to still access my information and she's going to plan this murder. And so in defending him, I just don't see how we can expect or think the worst of someone unless we've been privy to they're a little messed up and they're going to do something dangerous, in which case you do what we all know you do. You change everything so they have no access to you or your life.
Well, Ashley, you must be a better person than me because I live by 3 letters, DTA, don't trust anybody. That's my philosophy.
Probably smart.
Right. So let's take a listen to the medical examiner and hear what they had to say. Okay, you just heard the medical examiner, and Ashley, she said the path of the bullet back to front and downward. Now, I don't know how tall the victim in this case, Kendra Hatcher, was, but looking at the defendant, he's a pretty tall man. So it's pretty consistent with what we saw, and you could see that some pictures were being shown, at least to the jury. They were pretty graphic. You heard about the gunshot wound to the back of the head, and then you heard about the exit wound. But I think that's important to have this testimony simply because it's consistent with what the 911 caller said. It's consistent with the information the first responders that you can see on your screen there saw. I think all of that is consistent with what happened to Kendra Hatcher. What say you?
I agree. So the prosecution is tasked with showing every tiny step in connection because remember, and we all know, reasonable doubt in one juror, if you don't connect every single dot as a state, then the defense is going to be able to find that reasonable doubt for at least one juror. So that's the importance of this, is so far you do have 911 person who called 911, consistent with surveillance, consistent with the gunshot wound in direction of the bullet that was just testified to.
Right, and I actually think that Kristopher Love was up close and personal, albeit from behind, to Ms. Hatcher, simply because in all my years of shooting, one of the things we had to do on the police range were headshots from several feet away, and you'd be surprised how hard it is to hit such a small target area, especially when your adrenaline's up, which I'm sure his was. So I think he was up close and personal and got her as, like when she was opening that door to put something in the back of that car. What say you?
Well, so here's my question, Vincent, is we also have to think about the noise factor. So typically, especially in a parking garage, I'm kind of paying attention to the noises around me. I think I would hear someone approaching and start to turn around. So I wonder if she had, there's no evidences to this I'm aware of, but did she have ear pods in? Was she listening to music? It's that safety in a parking garage. Everyone out there needs to be alert because this could happen. How did he get so up close and personal? Don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to toss to a quick break. We have so much more to come on the Kristopher Love trial. This is a death penalty case in the state of Texas. Stay tuned to the Law&Crime Network. Okay, so that was testimony from Jennifer Escobar. She's a friend of Brenda Delgado, who is the mastermind behind this murder in the state of Texas. Actually, I want to bring up something she said there. She said she was on drugs a lot. So as a defense attorney, would you try to discredit her as best you can?
Absolutely. So there's some trial skills that are good going on here, and that is the prosecution has chosen to bring it out up front and say, hey, what state were you in? What were your circumstances? But that's exactly what I would capitalize on as the defense, to say, were you under the influence? If you were using drugs, you may not remember if you were under the influence, and therefore they can argue to the jury, this testimony is not credible.
Right, and not only that, she said that her boyfriend at the time was mentally abusing her. So again, as a defense, I'd say, so just so I'm clear, you're saying you were a drug user and you may have had mental problems. We can't really believe this witness, jury. What say you?
Absolutely, and I think that's the trick, is you ask those questions, you leave it alone, and then you use it in your closing argument to argue this is not a credible witness. You've got to discount all of her testimony.
That's right. So let's hear from another friend, Milton Martinez, who says they are also a friend of Brenda Delgado and her obsession with her ex-boyfriend. Okay, we have some breaking news. Of course, since Wednesday, the country has been on pins and needles about suspicious packages that have been delivered to several key Democrats. Of course, the Obamas, the Clintons, Soros, and Maxine Waters, and so many others. We are just getting word within the last 2 hours, 2 more packages have been discovered. So now we're up to 12. An 11th package was found in Florida, addressed to Senator Cory Booker at about 8:55 this morning, the FBI Eastern Time. The FBI announced that. And just recently, within the last 40 minutes or so, a 12th package was addressed to former Intelligence Director James Clapper. Ashley, what do you think's going on here? I mean, this has been going on since Wednesday. I said earlier in the week, when it was only about 5 packages that we knew of at that time, that we would see more. Obviously, that has occurred here. What do you think's going on? Do you think it has to do with the midterms, or do you think it's something else?
It's political based, the midterms. There's something that is driving this, the timing of it. I do think we're going to see more bombs. And one thing I like that I heard today is the United States Post Office is assisting in the investigation. There are more than 600,000 employees nationwide, all of whom are on the lookout and reporting, so that hopefully this can be brought to a conclusion soon. But I'm afraid we're going to see more.
Yeah, I think we will see more. And here's what I'm scared of, a few things, Ashley. Luckily, none of these devices have detonated. But I know in my days in the military, a lot of times what terrorist groups will do is do one little explosion here to draw everyone to that area. And then, boom, a second explosion is much bigger. If you think back to the World Trade Center in '93, yeah, they tried the truck. In 2001, they tried planes, and it worked. So I hope that this is not a diversion for something much bigger, and I hope everyone takes this seriously. What say you?
Exactly, and that's part of the issue, is nobody knows yet, and even if they know during the investigation, they certainly haven't given any of that aspect away in terms of protecting and preventing. So we don't know if it's a diversion or not. I think everyone has to be on high alert. Everyone has to be prepared in case it happens. And now, to me, anyone can be a target. It's all high profile. But think of how many high-profile politicians there are out there. So it could happen anywhere in the nation.
Right. And again, luckily, none of these devices have exploded or detonated, should I say. But do you think, Ashley, let's just play devil's advocate here. Everyone is assuming that since all of the individuals, all the targets have been Democrats or someone that have spoken out against President Trump, that it's political. But again, we talked about diversions. We talked about pulling a wool over someone's eyes. Do you think it could possibly be a separate group that has no political agenda, whether conservative or liberal, that it could actually be a terror attack in the works?
Absolutely, because it's smart. If it is a terror attack, then they're now pitting all of America against each other in another political statement, Democrats versus Republicans, Democrats versus the president, and that adds to the chaos and may be part of a master plan. So I don't think we can rule out that it could be terrorists at all. Absolutely.
We are covering this just like everyone else is in the country. We're going to take a quick break, get back to the Kristopher Love trial in the state of Texas. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. All right, so that was testimony from Kristopher Cortez, the alleged getaway driver in this. You heard, Ashley, that she said 2 weeks after she met Brenda Delgado, who was the mastermind behind this, they started following her. But what's interesting here, she mentioned 4 vehicles: Mustang, BMW, Lexus, which she said belonged to Brenda, and a Jeep. Now, that Jeep that we've heard about earlier at the top of the show, this black Jeep that was seen on surveillance, the black Jeep that the 911 caller described, I think that pretty much seals Kristopher Love's fate at this point. What say you?
Well, it certainly connects all the dots and shows him in a video and 911 person who called, and then you've got the same car and she says it's his. So I think it's connecting the dots, Vincent, but I guess I would argue if I were defense, well, that's all well and good. Who cares if he was in the parking garage? It doesn't mean that he shot her. So we still have to prove that piece, that it was him that actually shot her.
Well, you brought up something really good that you said, the defense. So from a defense standpoint, wouldn't you say the defense would likely argue, well, you were, Ms. Cortez, following the victim around for weeks. You testified that you were following her around in several cars. So how do we know that your testimony is true and that you indeed did not shoot and kill Ms. Hatcher?
Absolutely. That's going to be the defense's plan. But I'm going to tell you what the prosecution did again with this witness. They took the sting out, is what we call it in trial skills, because they said, didn't we meet? Didn't we say we could prove our case without you? We don't need you. So they're trying to take away from defense's argument she's not credible. But that's what defense is going to have to rely on with this witness. You could easily be lying to us because you're the one who did it, and you just want to put it on him and throw him under the bus.
Absolutely. So we've been talking about this black Jeep. Let's hear from the owner of the Jeep, Jose Ortiz. Sorry. Okay, so that was Jose Ortiz. He's the owner of this black Jeep Cherokee. Now, to set the stage, the mastermind, Brenda Delgado, and Kristopher Cortez, the alleged getaway driver, go to his house the day prior to Ms. Hatcher being shot and killed and borrow this black Jeep Cherokee, which is seen on surveillance footage. Ashley, we're starting to connect the dots here to say, yep, we still have at least Brenda Delgado's involvement, Kristopher Cortez, or Crystal's involvement as well, but not so much yet Kristopher Love. What say you?
I completely agree. So that's where I would be as the defense. It'd be like, so what if Delgado borrowed this car? She's the mastermind. It's her fault. She's the one that did it. So they haven't yet put that in. Now, the other thing that's really important about this little piece of testimony, some may say, so what? Why is he testifying to this? We already know they're in the black Cherokee. Because Delgado, if I were her, would say, well, it's not my car. I don't have a black Cherokee. Well, now they've connected that dot to say, okay, there is one that was borrowed. So now they do still have to connect the defendant. I agree with you.
Absolutely, because, again, we heard the getaway driver say, yes, for 2 weeks we stalked her and we went over in several cars, and she mentioned the Jeep as one of those vehicles. And speaking of that Jeep, let's actually take a look at some of the surveillance footage that was captured of this black Jeep on the day of the murder. All right, Ashley, you heard him there. He said he was there, but he didn't shoot the lady. So I think he was trying to place the blame on the co-defendants in this case, especially Cortez, who was the getaway driver. He said everything happened so fast, and he believed that they had ties to the cartel, and, you know, because they had shown him an ounce of coke and 4 ounces of weed. But, you know, in my days of working narcotics, I mean, that sounds like a lot of drugs, but that's definitely not cartel amounts of drugs, because usually cartels deal with kilos and not ounces. So do you think he's just making up this cockamamie story just because he knows he's caught?
Well, I would agree with you. That doesn't sound like cartel quantities for those of us who have had any experience with the crimes and related to drugs. So he also, I don't feel like he's very credible, because you also have to watch his demeanor. Remember, this was filmed in 2015. The interrogation was done at that time, so it's taken at the time of the incident or close to the time of the incident. And his demeanor is such, you know, I'm thinking here I'm being questioned for this horrific crime. He doesn't really display any emotions. He's kind of laid back, wrapped up, he just doesn't seem very concerned. So to me, it feels like he's just saying whatever comes off the top of his head to say it, and not necessarily the truth.
Right. And one thing I noticed about both of those videos we just saw, one, he's wrapped up in a blanket. The other, he has a shirt that looks like a marijuana leaf on the front. But I'm watching his body language, and he has his arms like tucked into the body of his shirt. He's wrapped up in this blanket. In my experience in doing interrogations, when people usually do that, you can see how laid back he is. When people usually do that, that means they're guilty. That's that body language, that never-ending body language that tells you, hey, this person is guilty of sin. I just either have to get a confession or get the evidence to prove it. But body language says a lot. What say you, Ashley?
Oh, I completely agree with you. And he's just, to me, again, if I was watching this as a juror, I don't think he comes across as very credible or honest or truthful. The other thing is, I think that the detective in this case does a really skillful job of asking the questions and getting the information and listening, right? He's letting him talk. He's listening to his answers, which I think is also a good way to get the information.
Absolutely. And he's not being forceful with his statements. He's actually listening. We're going to take a quick break. We have so much more to come with this trial. Kristopher Love on trial for capital murder in the state of Texas. Stay tuned to the Law&Crime Network. All right, so that was a phone call with Kristopher Love and his girlfriend. And Ashley, one of the things he said, I'm quoting him, "They trying to put the FBI on me, bruh." And then the girlfriend goes on to say, "If you shot that girl with that gun, you should have thrown it away." And then she says, "Whatever happens, I'm with you. I got your back." I never really understood that type of love myself, but I think this call itself is crucial. The audio here is crucial in discussing with the girlfriend about the gun. What say you?
Oh, absolutely. And so how now you're getting the pieces, Vincent, that connect him to the crime. And when you have this conversation, what astounds me is people in jail don't realize or remember or think about the fact it's all recorded. So
Right.
You better be careful what you're saying. But it's pretty damning when they start talking about the gun and maybe should have gotten rid of the gun. So I do think this is one piece in the puzzle, right? All the different pieces to put it together for the prosecution to show that this defendant is the one who shot her in the head.
Yeah, and you see the 40 caliber gun that they had there on the stand in the magazine as well. Now, what's interesting is Cortez, the getaway driver, mentioned that Kristopher Love was cleaning off the bullets. And for the viewers that don't understand what she meant by that, he was actually wiping the bullets down so his prints, his DNA, wouldn't be on the bullets. But again, it goes back to this phone call, the girlfriend saying, "Why didn't you throw the gun away?" So now we want to hear testimony from Detective Barnes. He's the guy that actually interrogated Kristopher Love. Let's hear what he had to say about this phone call. All right, you just heard from Detective Barnes. He mentioned how Kristopher Love, during that phone call with his girlfriend, in an earlier excerpt of that call, said, "I should have been smarter about getting rid of the gun." I mean, you should have been smarter, Ashley, to know that these phone calls are being recorded. It's a jail. It's a prison. Doesn't he know this?
He should know this. And I think you said a really good point when it was off-air discussion about the interrogation. To me, he did look like, oh, well, prove it. If you can prove it, prove it. And I think this goes to that as well. He doesn't think about the conversation he's having because I think he thinks in his mind, well, prove I did it. You don't have me a picture of me doing it or a video of me doing it. Not realizing that all these little pieces together and talking about, oh, I should have gotten rid of the gun is damning evidence.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we don't have a picture. We can't really say that's you in this surveillance footage, but we can say this is your voice, and you got a call from a number tied to your girlfriend, and you're mentioning throwing away the gun, and you're not saying it was another murder, and the girlfriend is saying, well, if you shot that girl, you should have gotten rid of the gun. She didn't say if you shot that guy or robbed the old lady at the grocery store. If you shot that girl, you should have gotten rid of the gun. And he says, well, yeah, I should have been smarter. Yeah, you should have been a lot smarter. But this story has so many moving pieces. Again, there was a getaway driver, Crystal Cortez. Let's hear more of her testimony during the day of the shooting. All right, that's more testimony from Crystal Cortez, the alleged getaway driver. But Ashley, she's saying some things here I'm not really feeling here as far as her involvement in this murder. She talks about the dry runs that they did. They excluded one person because they thought he would snitch. And then she says That's the gun we used during the murder. And then she goes on to say she asked another individual about a silencer. So again, as a defense attorney, when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, well, how do I know you were not the trigger person in this? And how do I know you didn't mastermind this murder? Your involvement is much more than the getaway driver. I was looking for a silencer. That's the gun we use. What say you, Ashley?
Well, especially given the fact we already know that she entered a plea deal, right? And with that, she got 35 years, so she avoided a potential death penalty case trial. And so I think that's a very good argument for the defense to make. And the prosecution now is going to have to still, we haven't seen it yet today in the replay, but present evidence to show that he actually was the one that pulled the trigger and killed the victim.
Right. And how do you do that? Of course, the victim's not here to tell that story, right? You see some grainy surveillance footage. We saw his interrogation. He's kind of just laid back like, yeah, prove it. Like, I didn't shoot that lady. You know, you have to prove it, which is true. The state, you can see him there with his arms tucked in his shirt. The state has to prove its case. And here we have this co-defendant who, like you said, took a plea deal for 35 years saying, that's the gun we use, and I was asking for a silencer. So, you know, yeah, we have the phone call about dropping the gun or getting rid of the gun, and it was stupid that he didn't. But how do we know that this co-defendant there, Kristopher, did not supply the gun, the bullets, and everything else?
Right, we don't know. I mean, that's the bottom line, is we don't yet know. Now, they're also going to finish with her testimony, and I suspect the prosecution might ask those questions just to put it out there, but it doesn't mean defense isn't going to argue, hey, she's not credible, she was involved, she could have done this, we don't have enough evidence, it's reasonable doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to toss to a quick break. We have so much more to come in the Kristopher Love murder trial. He's on trial right now for capital murder in the state of Texas. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. All right, that was testimony from Kristopher, the alleged getaway driver. In this case, again, Kendra Hatcher was shot and killed, according to her, by Kristopher Love. Actually, they talked about this planning, these payments, this dry run that they did before, and part of the payment was going to be marijuana, or as she called it, kush, which is a form of marijuana on the street, and cocaine. But do you think that is credible testimony since she's mentioning that drugs were involved in this case?
Well, I mean, I think that it goes to that, not necessarily because drugs were involved, Vincent, but the question's going to become, were they on drugs? Were they incapacitated?
Right.
Can they remember? Do they know what happened? Or were they using drugs and unable to know, and all of those issues around that? So that's the linkage. Just because drugs are involved isn't necessarily affecting the credibility of a witness, but if they're on drugs at the time of the incident, that changes it.
Yeah, and plus, you know, according to credibility, you still have the surveillance footage of that black Jeep leaving the garage. You see it was stalking there in the garage. Actually, let's switch gears just for a second here, because, again, something that's been gripping this country for the last couple of days since Wednesday are these suspicious packages being delivered across the country to some pretty key high individuals. And just today, 2 more packages were discovered, one addressed to Cory Booker and then one addressed to the former intelligence director, James Clapper. Ashley, when do you think this will stop?
You know, I don't know, but look at the similarities with all 12 of these bombs. There's 6 postage stamps in the right-hand corner that are U.S. flags. It's the same name on the return address. So I think that the evidence would show all of these are done by the same group or person. And because of that, that gives the FBI, all the ATF, all the people investigating a place to start. I know they're in Florida currently, according to reports, investigating there. So will it stop? Yes. Will someone be caught? Yes, I believe so. But I also think we're going to see more of these deliveries before that happens.
Right. And here's what I think, Ashley, because now we're up to 12, right? So eventually, even if you're trying to be as careful as possible, eventually, when you're doing something this much, you make mistakes. Like maybe you licked the stamp on the envelope, or maybe you didn't wear gloves, and you can see some masking tape, some packing tape on some of those packages there. Maybe there's a print on that package packaging tape or even on the envelope. So I think with all of these devices, you have the ATF, of course, investigating. You have local law enforcement, FBI. But I think they're actually looking for any DNA in this case. What say you?
Oh, well, forensics, that's how so many cases are made, right? And eventually the forensics catches up to the person. So I think you're absolutely right. There is evidence there. The other thing is it doesn't mean that FBI, ATF, local law enforcement doesn't have evidence and good leads. It just means that that information hasn't necessarily been released to the public. So certainly I think that they're on their way and figuring out who did it. I just think that 12 in such a short period of time, who knows how many have been sent? I think we're going to see more.
Yeah, I think so, too. And to your point, there's a lot that investigators, especially on the federal level, are not going to release. But I can tell you one thing they're probably doing is checking social media, see if anyone was very vocal about these targets in recent weeks or maybe even recent months. You know, a lot of times people live vicariously through social media and say certain things and not necessarily mean it, but at the same time, that's something that federal investigators are going to look at. Ashley, I know it's almost your time to go. What are your final thoughts in about 30 seconds on Kristopher Love?
On Kristopher Love, let's see. I just think the prosecution has a lot of good evidence. They have to put it together. But I still wonder, are the pictures prejudicial and the emotional aspect prejudicial to this defendant in terms of portraying the victim?
Absolutely. Ashley, I appreciate you for joining us today. As always, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the Law and Crime Network. We will see you next time. We're going to take a quick, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. We have so much more to come on Kristopher Love in the state of Texas. He's on trial for capital murder of a young, prominent dentist over a jealous girlfriend and her rage of her seeing her ex-boyfriend. So much more to come here on the Law and Crime Network. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back.